Welcome to Exploration Session Summaries. Exploration sessions are offered online as opportunities to speak and listen to each other in a sincere effort to gain understanding about each other's perspectives on a World Conference resolution. A single resolution is the focus of 5 sessions each week. At the conclusion of each session, the breakout groups share a summary of their conversations. This podcast includes all small groups' summaries on one resolution. For more information about exploration sessions, go to seaofchrist.org/2023-world-conference.
We as a group brought a variety of life experiences to our discussion, both in personal relationships and in ministerial experiences with U.S. cultures and others around the world. Not so much that we went there, but interacted with them within the United States. Our belief is that we needed to trust in our leaders, in their awareness and experience with other cultures to provide guidance and ministry in congruence with our Community of Christ beliefs. And we also hope that we can trust that they will consult a diverse group of representatives, especially those considered vulnerable populations all around the world. Question was, are there restrictions now that will be lifted if this passes? That was not clear. There was a concern that materials be made available and searchable on the Community of Christ website once they're developed.
Our first concern with this resolution is that we want to know what influenced the decisions for the apostles to make this resolution. We thought that if we'd had a preface or a little bit of background, it would have enabled us to come up with better answers. What were some of the factors that influenced our thoughts? Well, we were all from North America, but we have been exposed to conditions in the world that are different than what we have or experience here in North America. Also, a member of our group had been a part of a Project Zion podcast, and a couple of the members had read WCR 1182 and said that it was very prescriptive. And now we're moving to a more principle-based theory, I'm going to say, rather than a rule, something that's rule-based. And to me, that's like the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. We all came from different kinds of backgrounds where marriages have, just gone on and have been wonderful. There have been situations where there have been marriage breakdowns. There have been situations where there's been divorce. There are situations where there's polyamorous, and also very familiar with the LGBTQ community. And also aware of sometimes in Africa, sometimes a spouse dies, and often the partner, in many cases, the woman has to remarry for no other reasons than financial. Or sometimes they don't marry and they're just together. Questions that we had is, what is a marriage-like relationship? Is that a common law? What happens if a person or if a partner gets dementia and goes on for 10 or 15 years and the other partner becomes involved with somebody? We didn't go into what that could involve. Where do we stand on that? Or the partner could be in a coma. So many things could happen. We thought that, or we're hoping that with this new resolution, that the apostles will now be able to act with certain principles and have more freedom to act using their own conscience, and that in itself could be freeing. We also thought that the language for the new resolution could be changed when you look at 1182, because 1182 is very restricting, and new language would be more inclusive for us to accept people living in marriage-like conditions. And also the language would be, in 1182, it states husband and wife. Now we have husband and husband, we have wife and wife, we have many situations. Then one of our concerns for all of this is we still have many members of the church that are very conservative, and will there be a backlash? And then somebody said, well, perhaps not, because many of us have come to accept the LGBTQ community, and that's going well. But a good example was one story that was told is that they had a relative who belonged to the colorful community. I use it. Somebody back east calls it the alphabet train, and I don't mean to be rude by saying that, but she felt so accepting and having the church come to this to accept them. But she said, now what has happened to those people that can't accept me? Now they're not coming to church. So she really felt a dilemma. So will we experience the same thing with this?
We had some questions about why 1182 was not rescinded before now, since it speaks of marriage as a husband and wife within that document. Why wasn't it rescinded in 2013? Perhaps it just got lost. There may still be some challenges in countries where LGBTQ is still illegal. And was this meant to clear questions about monogamy and polygamy, or was it just meant to be more inclusive and principle-based? Does it bring us a stronger footing with the majority of Christians around the world? We found it a benefit. It's healthy for us as ministers to revisit the marriage covenant, and what does that look like when we perform a marriage ceremony? And again, we'd like to have more information resources on the internet, as stated in the last resolve, and be easy to find. Does it put a damper on our church ministry where poly is legal, or where polyamorous relationships might need to be considered? We found it an insight to it's good to meet together and hear things not considered before. It was helpful to look at 164 again and reconsider again our quality of relationships. One challenge is perhaps some will question the ability of the Council of 12 to set policies that may differ across the church. That's happened with other sacraments, but we just need to be aware of that challenge may come up.
Our summary is that we feel that this resolution creates a safe place for all people, that Jesus didn't exclude people during his life, and this resolution would continue to put us in those footsteps, fostering relationships through the resolution, that we feel change is a part of who the church is, and that we shouldn't shy away from it. We as the church have been an outcast church. We should be more understanding and accepting of others and taking that first step. Commitment to one another is what's key in a marriage, and holding on to our basic principles. Struggles in some marriages would be very different, and we're wondering if this would be a North American resolution or if it is truly a world resolution. Some of the challenges, we felt it would have helped if we had some concrete examples, and the challenge would be putting the resolution into action. We couldn't cover every situation, and whatever the apostles come up with to ensure the rights of others, most of us would make that work. We need to find ways to come together no matter what our differences are, and education would need to be provided that could be a challenge.
Yeah, many of us have expressed the value that we have of marriage relationships. There was an expression of trust in the apostles and a curiosity about what other countries might be encountering, that passing this resolution might expand our witness and of our concern for all people and respect for the diversity of others. There was concern about where was this coming from and why do we have to start all over? Because we didn't understand why the resolution was coming before the body. There was a reference to harm that referred to in the Doctrine and Covenants, I think, about harm in terms of our interpretation of marriage relationships, and we didn't know what was meant by also the term marriage-like relationship, what was meant by that terminology. There's curiosity about what assumptions do we have from our U.S. culture that might not be applicable to other countries. We talked about the legality of the marriage issue, even being different in different states in the United States, in terms of trying to have this perspective that maybe there's things that we don't understand from other countries' perspectives. But we spent a lot of time just feeling a lot of confusion and frustration about not knowing or understanding where this was coming from and where it was hoped to go to. Concerned that that kind of confusion could create a space for manipulation, may be a strong word, but that when there's confusion, then it makes it more difficult for a group to come to consensus. There was concern that action would be taken without delegates having more informed perspective, but we also talked about the quorums and the discussion that will go on the floor that would help with that. We have questions about just would like to understand some of the complexities that other cultures face in relationship to marriage. And one person pointed out that they'd had a discussion in their area, and in one country, legal marriage doesn't happen until after the religious marriage, so that there are things that we can understand. There's a section 164.7c. We read that, and it also gives the apostles latitude to make policy decisions. So there was the question, if they have that latitude, why this was needed. We realized that we were looking through marriage through our own lens and not other cultures, and that we needed to be open to that.
No one in our group really had any strong input one way or the other as far as personal experiences, other than we have all had our personal marriage experiences within our culture in the United States. We had some comments that this might allow us to utilize the gifts of, or expand the pool of people's gifts that we can utilize, where perhaps there's people living in countries or in conditions where they cannot legally be married for one reason or another. And this would allow the apostles to utilize their skills and talents. Interesting with the terming of a marriage-like relationship. Most of us were curious as to what was the impetus or the scenario that caused this resolution to be brought up. But we all kind of agreed that, we have one lens that we all look through, and we're aware that there are differences in other cultures. We're not sure if same-sex issues was a trigger. Several of us kind of wondered if maybe divorce might also have a say, or in remarriage. And there was a expression that we need to learn and understand the reasons in other cultures, but also the concern that maybe we would never even have that opportunity. The resolution, it would go to the First Presidency and the apostles, and the membership really wouldn't be involved any longer.
Okay, well, we kind of looked this over, and we were kind of talking about our, start with our background. We're all kind of come from long marriages and church membership. And then we talked about benefits. One was that the apostles do have more experience dealing with other cultures, so they might have a better perspective on the needs. And we appreciate the fact that it does reaffirm monogamy. Impacts, though, it was kind of giving the apostles' First Presidency kind of a blank check. It doesn't come back for checks to the General Conference again, the World Conference again. It does take out the male-female language of the original document, but the rest of the document is vague, we thought. It's not clear exactly what they're saying they're going to be doing. 1182 was very clear. Questions, we've always been a prophetic church. This seems to give the apostles a little too much power. Is that okay? Is that the direction we want to go? Could this be written so it does come back to the World Conference for approval? Because the document, as it's stated, does not come back to World Conference. Are we pushing our North American policies into our other areas too much? Are we giving too much authority to just a small group of people of our church? Challenges, we saw that we believe the document is just too weak, too vague, unclear. Is this really what we want the document to do? We've always kind of gone with common consent of the body, and in this document, it doesn't really go with that common consent. This would be different in different countries without coming back for World Conference approval. Is that the direction we want to go? Some of the comments from the group, are we trying to change God's will to our will by removing the common consent, by removing the Bible, by removing what we've done in the past? Is this kind of where we're going? We do all have different opinions. We thought an insight from the group was it's good that we are looking at these documents and not just going with this one because it is from the Council of 12. It's nice that we're being able to discuss it. We would like to see more clarity in the document. What is really going to happen, and have that come back maybe to World Church approval, conference approval, instead of just going ahead with an unclear document. So that's kind of where we were. It was just not clear enough, not focused enough on what it's really saying.
We concluded with a prayer, beautiful prayer from one of our members for guidance and understanding, where we feel that serious need for more guidance and understanding on this worldwide issue, for it isn't just a matter of our denomination, but it's a matter of our culture as a community of Christ that we are wanting to invoke and to move toward. We'd like to see emphasis on the sacramental elements of marriage, and those seem to have been somewhat muted in the resolution, and we want to maintain the sacramental element because we find that all but one of our group have been married for 30 years or more, and the fact that some of us have been more than 50 years makes it so that that sacramental element clearly has sustained us, and we feel very significantly drawn toward that. Although we did also have one unmarried single person, and it was a pleasure to have that vantage point in our group as well. The discussion of authority issues is one of our significant areas of potential disagreement, because the question of whether the authority for decision-making belongs to the First Presidency and the members of the Quorum of 12, or among the people of the conference, the delegates and the church itself, those are issues that we would like to maintain the integrity of the body of Christ, community of Christ, and probably we ought to be recognizing the community of Christ is communities of Christ, and to be able to appreciate those communities with their diverse vantage points to pull unity out of that diversity was one of the areas of our focus. The idea that we are, as Westerners, focused upon an independence motive, where we emphasize our nuclear families, is quite different from the Eastern cultures that are much more interdependent. And that interdependence may very well be a closer alignment with the Zionic principles than what our independence is. And so we were looking at the possibility of having to retool some of our thinking in order to be able to bring it more in line with the concepts of Zion that are embodied in our church. And finally, we are generally in agreement that we like 1182. We do not feel that it needs to be rescinded. We would suggest that it be amended instead, amend rescinding to providing apostolic counsel sensitive to the specific cultural needs, that therefore would then go to the First Presidency and then back to the conference for consideration. But we do want to embrace more of our culture as Community of Christ, rather than just our denomination as Community of Christ.
We were talking about the impact of the resolution and the ways that it could benefit Community of Christ. And one of the impacts that was stated was that it will be strong if enough consistency across the apostles about the beliefs of marriage as shared, because there is confusion about what the church believes about marriage and what God instituted. There's concern on a couple of these questions about clinging to monogamy and the fact that are the priesthood that are presiding at marriages going to be monogamous? And a positive thing is that if it's so sensitive to all the cultures, then it will be so much more welcoming. There was concern about moving from one jurisdiction to another or state or whatever, because the guidelines might change because of laws at that point. We also felt like the worth of all persons is important, and that's brought out in this resolution. The benefits might be that it might make us more aware that there are other ways of living within God's love, including other cultures and their perspectives. The questions we had were, is the explanation excluding the reference to the priesthood given in this? And there was the question of, why are we completely rescinding 1182? And is the policy on marriage going to include something about divorce, because that's not mentioned? And then in the last resolve, it talks about basic resources. A challenge possibly could be finding appropriate resources for all the different cultures. Challenges also in the terminology, because it's pretty general, and challenging to have consistency and following God's way if it's too general. The need as a church to have faith in our leadership to implement this wisely as they work together on it and bring it back to the First Presidency and Council of 12. It was brought up that love conquers all, and if there's love, then God's purposes will be there as well. There was concern about the challenging of the legality that can be interpreted differently, going from nation to nation, state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, tribe to tribe, and religious group to religious group.
All of us accept traditional monogamy marriage, and we had a variety of experiences among us about what the resolution talks about. We are all supportive of the resolution. We feel it will allow the Council of the 12 more freedom in dealing with customs and traditions of the areas they work with. but we also feel it's going to be vital that the Council of the 12 know more than ever the laws and customs of the countries that they serve. We think a very strong benefit will be as the church grows around the world, that this resolution will make it possible for people to be more interested in our church. Current seekers may lead them to joining the church, and an opportunity for priesthood ordination. We are curious about what's going to happen to current policies about divorce and remarriage. Interesting to see what the apostles would do with this resolution, and would like to know if the decisions that they make will be public knowledge.
Our group basically comes from the USA traditional model of marriage and experience with that. We did have one of the members that shared some wonderful insight about how marriage and marriage relationships is different in other countries, especially in Europe. So that was very helpful to hear that. And it just really pointed out, while we have our comfort zone and the tradition of the USA marriage, that there's a lot of uniqueness around the world. I think generally supportive of the resolution as well, and hoping that it will provide flexibility, clarity, clarification, not only for our members and clarification in terms of different cultures and that kind of thing, but also how we are seen from outside of the church. Are we being consistent? Are we really lifting up the worth of persons? And so the parameters and frameworks that are clarified will be really helpful in this. Very grateful for the resources that are mentioned in there, and hopefully that will be an extremely valuable tool. We recognize that if we get outside of the traditional marriage ideas, that there might be tensions. And so we hope that a certain amount of clarity will help. And we hope that the guidance we get from the First Presidency and the Council of 12 will acknowledge that. And it's not just about same-sex relationships. It's not just about same-sex marriage, but there's divorce and marriage for those in their later years. And so we appreciate the challenge coming up with the language to define and redefine. Is it just going to be guidelines that we get? We acknowledge the struggle that traditional marriage folks will have with this, but we hope that, number one, it doesn't take a long time to get through this, that it'll come to the church quickly. But the question is, what will we get? We know that one resolution is going away. What is actually the result? Are we going to have a new resolution, or what exactly? To kind of conclude, the resources are really going to be important, that we acknowledge divorce, that we acknowledge that we have to minister very carefully, because that whole issue has presented problems for the church. Premarital resources, post-marriage resources, all those things are going to be so helpful as we try to negotiate a new way of looking at the marriage relationship. And we hope that the leadership will be both prophetic and pastoral over a wonderful breadth of issues that are brought up in this resolution.
We recognize that we have continued to be evolving church that tries to stay in line with our understanding and how those are changing, and the position of the church and the practices for a worldwide church, and recognizing those differences. But we were concerned that some of the rescinding of this might remove the guidance that people continue to seek to have. So, like has already been mentioned, the importance of making sure appropriate materials are provided for counseling and preparation and guidance. One of our other concerns was this isn't addressing specifically that there is other types of marriages that still exist in the world that are not just monogamous, and hoping that that would be further considered and addressed. Looking for the question of, what this brings up, what is the role of the church in defining marriage, and whether or not this intensifies that desire or opens the door up to be more lenient. One of our also concerns that came up was how right now this redefines the role of the apostle as it exists today, And with changes of apostleship that occurs all the time, is this going to create ongoing issue because apostles can move from one region to another? Would this impact how these decisions are made by the council and those particular apostles in the places that they are called to serve? And again, just reiterating what's already been said, if this is rescinded, looking for the very important desire for appropriate guidance that would come out of the church for both preparation and before marriage and second marriages along those lines.
In my growing up, I had two sisters. One didn't talk very much, but when she would listen to what was expressed, she would say, "Me too." And that's kind of how we feel. You've addressed most everything that we covered. However, of course, we're individuals. In the beginning, the first question was, how does our life experiences, how do they affect this resolution? And all of the different stages of marriage, the being monogamous, and the other, we discussed just about everything imaginable. And then we got down to the ideas of how does our priesthood responsibility, how is it affected when you're trying to counsel individuals that are going through troubling times? And that's what we need, is the guidance from these. Is taking this WCR away, is that going to be beneficial? So the concerns about the beliefs of worldwide and other nationalities and customs was also something that we want to hear more about and learn more about. And so we do look to the Council of 12 for that. The number 2 was what benefits we would see from changes and for this resolution. What would be important is what a person feels, what they want. They want to be considered important. They also want to be accepted. And we have people who come into our churches now seeking that kind of acceptance, no matter how they are in their marital situation. And we have to consider the worth of all people, no matter what their status is, and give them the opportunity to feel important and to feel accepted. We are welcoming. We should be welcoming. How will this resolution affect what is going on today in our societies around us, outside our front doors? For a worldwide church, we need to review how our opinions will affect our standing also with the Council of Churches. I don't know if anyone mentioned that. And we need, the people say, to support marriage as a lived relationship. And what does that mean to you? And also marriage-like relationships. What does that mean? Number 3 was, what is the challenge about the resolution? The WCR 1182 is dated. And the real question, what is God calling us for this day, this time, this minute? We need to hear from the Council of 12, as has been mentioned, what they are having and why they are having to address this. What's going on, and can we hear what's going on? One of our people read just the beginning of the resolution. Whereas marriage is a sacrament and sacred covenant relationship of love and equality between two people, and recognized as a valued institution in the cultures of the world, equality in marriage.
Number 1, the benefit of marriage from a variety of cultural perspectives is something that we all recognize would be enhanced with this resolution. The apostles are in a position to know and understand those various cultures. I'll jump down to one of the challenges we saw was looking at this in the variety of cultures in the midst of a worldview, because things are going to be very different. One of the resolves that was helpful was that resolve said that any changes, I'll read it right here. All definitions, guidelines, practices, and policies developed by apostles will be reviewed and approved by the Council of 12 and the First Presidency prior to implementation. So that helps smooth over transitions that occur over time, and that everybody understands the principles behind it. One of the things we thought was very important with this resolution is there's an emphasis on inclusion and removing barriers. And it allows us then to really embrace the principles of Section 162 that admonish us to look to the sacraments, but not be overly concerned about the practices and the form of those particular ordinances. So I think that this resolution embraces that. There was a concern that it may dilute the sacramental approach to marriage, but it isn't the form, it's the relationship that is central, and the principle behind it should be what we really look at embracing. Making decisions on how we look at sacraments of marriage in the context of various laws of different countries will be important. In the discussion that we had as a group, we found that it's very different. But if you look at just divorce between Canada and the US, in Canada, if one party doesn't want to get divorced, you don't get divorced, no matter what happens. And you go for years with dysfunctional relationships or people just absolutely just separating and going separate ways, but not divorcing. And how do you deal with that then? So the laws, common law, marriage and so forth, how do you deal with that in the legalities of it in the context of the sacramental approach that we have as a church? We really want to look at embracing the principles, but they recognize that there may be some challenges in doing so. Rescinding Section 182, it's obvious from our group's perspective that it was very Western world focused and really left a lot of the developing countries and so forth out and didn't really look at their different cultures and different practices. And it's something that this resolution really opens the door to really informing the rest of the church of what some of our brothers and sisters do in their daily life.
So we talked about the three questions. We weren't too far apart in our thinking. That we felt for question number one that maybe we needed a definition, a clearer definition of what marriage was, and maybe we needed to ask what the apostles were actually looking for. Possibly, are we looking traditional or contemporary between same sex? We just needed to establish what marriage looked like. And then we talked about how the document originally was adopted in 1984 and that it is time for change, that our society and our culture had changed and that we were dealing with more of a global church rather than Western church. And that would mean that we have to look at different cultures. And we were appreciative of the apostles who were in those different cultures, that they were coming up against things that we have no idea about because of the differences in cultures. So we did determine that probably there wasn't a one size fits all kind of establishment for this resolution. We had no fears that the resolution would throw this church into apostasy or anything like that, that it was a good challenge for us and that we wanted to make LGBTQ as well as others more valued. We needed to have maybe some examples from our apostles to make the understanding of what this resolution was looking for a little bit more clear. And we're hoping that maybe at World Church that will happen. We needed to look at God's will and be more discerning, and that it wasn't our will, but his will. So
we talked about our own marriage situations, but we also talked about performing marriages, and that often, though we performed the marriages as priesthood, that they didn't last. Thought that there was some opportunity for evangelism through the marriage ceremony. We wanted to make sure that we are sensitive to other cultures and situations, and that each person and relationship is unique, and we need to be sensitive to that and to honor one another. We realize that different countries have different practices around marriage. This resolution aligns with Doctrine and Covenants 164.7 in that we have a general principle that can be applied in ways that respect different cultures and different cultures' laws. And we recognize that the church is becoming more diverse, as represented by the new appointments on the Council of 12. We did have a question about what is the resolution really wanting and why they need to rescind all of 1182, or is it just part of that needs to be rescinded? And I think that's partially because we haven't really read 1170 or 82. Some of the challenges and insights, if the policies around marriage are going to be different according to the region or the culture, that communication and the rationale behind them are going to need to be clearly communicated. We looked up a dictionary definition of monogamy and realized that it doesn't specify male or female anymore, which is interesting to us. That the situation around marriages in the church requires sensitivity on the part of all. We also noted that there are still some gaps in regard to priesthood and congregational training around marriage, specifically around premarital counseling and its importance, around policies and training for people who are having difficulty in marriage, and for training around the requirements of marriage in the Doctrine and Covenants, and specifically the statement that the Doctrine and Covenants requires to have in Community of Christ marriages. And we concluded that the alignment of this resolution to Doctrine and Covenants 164.7 gives the apostles more freedom to make decisions that apply to individual situations rather than a blanket policy that they have to apply.
We raised the question as to who would be responsible for identifying resources related to the sacrament of marriage and premarital counseling, those kinds of things. We were concerned that the term monogamy and its application globally, we weren't real sure how that plays out in various cultures around the globe. WCR 1182, we clearly needed to have more understanding about what that current resolution says and does in the life of the church. And so we were challenged with going to that resolution and doing some more understanding and research with it. We're not sure how the definition and guidelines would need to change. And we recognize that the apostles are going to be responsible for helping to define those terms in a culturally sensitive way based on their jurisdictions. But we also recognize that it's not individual administrators who are dictating or creating the policy in and of themselves in a vacuum. They bring it back to the council and they bring it back to the First Presidency for its implications in the life of the church before it becomes enacted as a policy for the church. We're a little concerned that in rescinding 1182, that then raises some questions about the dissolution of marriage and what happens in the lives of persons who find themselves in those circumstances and how we can affirm the worth of persons and what things we need to do in terms of administrative actions and otherwise, which at this point, because the apostles haven't crafted the policy, we don't know what that intent is and how they intend to address those things. As with many of the resolutions coming to conference, we want more background as to what precipitated bringing this resolution to the World Conference. You know, what was happening, what is happening in our field jurisdictions that are causing our apostles to bring this to the conference so that it can be more clearly addressed as a church. Lastly, and probably as important as anything, we have a concern that just as we go to start changing definitions and terminology, we have to be careful that that doesn't lead to other unintended consequences, to other unintended definitions and policies that allow other things. We mentioned a recent Facebook post where persons were suggesting that marriage should be much broader in its understanding than what we might as individuals want to claim as the sacrament of marriage. And most of all, that it's really God's sacrament that enters into the lives of humankind. And so we want to be respectful and discerning of how God would want us to interpret how those sacraments are lived out in the life of the church.
We felt that this adoption of this resolution may bring harmony and bring us together. We questioned, is the traditional understanding of marriage static? Is there more understanding that we might discern? We questioned why this authority is would be going to the apostles, and what's the difference between broadening the concept of marriage and the principle of marriage. Are there non-monogamous cultures that are being brought into Community of Christ currently? We absolutely affirm marriage between two people. It would be a benefit to Community of Christ and to the world. It leaves open the concept of loving relationship and a marriage-like relationship. A possible impact could be the further alienation of people who support 1182 and see no need for change. A challenge is forming a worldwide community of inclusiveness in which all are comfortable. Another insight and challenge, both. Either way this goes, there may be pain. The proposed resolution does not speak to priesthood. And will this be part of the developing guidelines and policies?